I'm starting to not feel the best. Hey everyone, well, it's a beautiful day here in Southern California, and whether you're new or returning, welcome to the channel. If you guys have been following me, you know that I've been on the hunt for a new road bike, and today with me I have the new Orbea Orca. And let me tell you guys, this thing can sure climb. Over the last few months, I've had the opportunity to ride this bike over 1,600 miles, have done thousands of feet of elevation, and spent long days in the saddle all through the hills of Santa Monica and Malibu. I've taken up some of the steepest climbs in the area, and I'm gonna let you guys know how this bike performed, where this bike shines, what are some of the unique riding characteristics, and is this gonna be the bike for me? You guys will just have to stay tuned to find out. This is the Orange Helmet Guy. Let's go. My name is Harrison, AKA the Orange Helmet Guy, and I live here in Southern California. I'll be breaking this video down into a couple of sections, but before that, I just want to send a huge shout out to Orbea for letting me ride this bike for the last few months, and thanks to my home shop, Serious Cycling, for setting this thing up and getting me dialed in. With that said, full disclaimer, this is not a sponsored video and it is not an ad, so I'm gonna give you guys my honest review and opinions of this bike. A little while ago, I actually did test ride and review the kind of older brother of this bike, the Orbea Orca Aero, which I absolutely love. You guys can go back into my channel and check that video out. I'll leave a link in the description below. But with that said, I was interested to see what the climbing version of that bike felt like, something that was just a little bit lighter and maybe the handle, the steeper climbs just a little bit better. So thanks again to the guys at Orbea for setting this up. All right, so now let's get into the build of this bike. This is Orbea's lightweight racing climbing bike, and let me tell you guys, this thing is ultra light. This frame is their OMX frame, which is their lightest, stiffest carbon layup. They do have one frame below this called the OMR, which is just a little bit heavier. The finishing kit on this bike is the Shimano Ultegra 12-speed. There's a 52-36 up front and an 11-34 out back. Up here at the cockpit is some proprietary components by Orbea by their in-house brand called Ouqo. The stem is a 110 and it has a 15mm riser handlebar. On top here is my Selle Italia SLR Superflow saddle that I put on every bike. The wheel set on this bike is also provided by Ouqo, Orbea's in-house brand. These are the RP45 Team wheels that are just about 1,425 grams. Let's talk about the paint job of this bike because it is pretty unique and custom to this bike. This is called Blue Carbon View. It's this translucent blue that's on top of a raw carbon. It kind of looks like transparent candy coating. I absolutely love it. Now let's get on to the curb appeal of this bike, because to be honest, that's one of the most important things. So the silhouette of this bike is fairly traditional, but it does have a really nice modern touch to it. The profile of the bike is extremely thin from the side, but as you work your way around to the top, you can really see how wide that top tube is, adding a little bit more comfort and compliance to this frame. The bike has a very familiar triangle setup with the rear seat stay connecting all the way to the top tube. They say this is to make the ultimate climbing bike. When you have that rear triangle that goes all the way to the top tube, gives it the most stiffness and power efficiency out of the frame. Now, also looking at this frame, you can tell that it's definitely not an aero frame, and Orbea actually is pretty proud of that and doesn't really make too many aero claims on this bike. Again, this is their all-out ultralight climbing bike. With that said, they did do a few things to it to try to make it, I wouldn't say aero, but just look really nice. So the bar and stem, while the cables are not routed internally through the bars, they are wrapped under the bars through a channel, and then they are routed internally through the stem, and then from there on out, all the cables are hidden. This rear seat stay top tube junction is actually pretty cool and unique. The way it connects and molded just looks very organic, and I really like that. They also have a little rubber cover for the seat post bolt. I really don't think that has anything to do with aerodynamics, but it does offer some protection from the elements, so it protects that bolt from rusting and corroding, or from any type of mud and gunk getting up and building up inside that seat post bolt. Again, staying with the back of the bike, you can really see how pencil thin these rear seat stays are, as well as the chain stay. It's really not that large at all. But then you get to this really massive down tube. It adds a lot of stiffness to the bike, and I think adds a really nice aesthetic feature to it as well. With the Orbea logo in this chrome finish on top of that translucent carbon blue view, looks really, really nice. The front fork, you could definitely tell, is not an aero fork, but the thinness of the fork does offer a lot of comfort and compliance to this bike, which we'll get to in a second. The overall geometry on this bike is still race oriented, so it's not the longest, lowest thing out there, but it is also not the most relaxed geometry either. Again, this is an all-out race bike that's being raced in the World Tour right now. With that said, I do think the geometry on this bike is extremely comfortable and really should work for about anyone, especially when you put on these 15mm riser handlebars. So let's first talk about how this bike feels up the climbs, because that's where I spend most of my time. So climbing on this bike, surprise, surprise, feels absolutely amazing. Again, this is Orbea's ultra lightweight climbing bike, so it climbs extremely well. I was really surprised about how well this bike climbs and how stiff it is for how comfortable it is. One of the most unique riding characteristics of this bike, which I personally love, is just how short the wheelbase is. I've mentioned this before and I'll mention it in this video again. When I climb, I like to get out of the saddle and move the bike under me back and forth a little bit. And with that short wheelbase, this bike does it extremely well. Up the climbs, especially on the steep climbs, when you can get out of the saddle and put a little bit of power around those steep corners, the bike feels extremely lively. It's very springy and it kind of just propels you through the corners. The geometry on this bike too, it is a race geometry, but it's not overly aggressive. So when you're going up the hills, it puts you in a really nice, relaxed climbing position. You can scoot up on the saddle a little bit and ride on the tops. And when you do that, the bike feels absolutely great. And honestly, you can climb all day on this thing. There was many days where my legs were just feeling a little bit dead and not quite right. I'm starting to not feel the best. 106 degrees right here. And at the top, it's gonna get a little hotter. But honestly, the efficiency, the power transfer, and the comfort of this bike make those days feel even easier than they are. Speaking of the power and the efficiency of this bike, I set pretty much every single uphill PR on this bike. I wasn't really going for those PRs. The couple times I really wanted to go for the PRs, I did get the PRs, but I did get some PRs or even second best times on this climbs when maybe my legs didn't feel perfect. But again, just the efficiency of this bike and the frame feels really good. When you're going really hard, you really don't feel it. The bike doesn't fatigue you and throw you around at all. And I think that's what makes this frame so great. It's responsive and explosive when you want it to be, but it's also comfortable when you need it to be. I took this bike on a 10,000 foot day going up one of the steepest climbs in the area, Deer Creek, which sees gradients upwards of 15%, and this bike handled it no problem, especially with that 11 to 34 outback. Really made that hill feel just a little bit easier than I remember. All right, that was Deer Creek, and it was pretty tough, but to be honest, I'm feeling a little crazy today. So I think I'm gonna go back down and do it all over again. All right, so let's talk about how this bike feels on some rolling terrains. Well, again, the bike is so lightweight, comfortable, and compliant. I'm just gonna keep saying that over and over again, sorry. But it is so great that over some of the false flats and gradients in that kind of 3 to 5% range, almost feels like all the roads are flat. The bike just really sings and glides over the rolling hills, and it feels really nice. Especially paired with these 30C tires, it just feels like a magic carpet ride. But again, the bike is very stiff and race oriented. Speaking of the wheels, they are extremely comfortable. There was another bike that I reviewed that had carbon spoke wheels that gave me a pretty harsh, buzzy ride pretty much anywhere I went, including up some of the slower hills. But these wheels with this frame feel absolutely amazing. One of the things though that you will notice, especially if you've ridden an aero bike before, an aero bike, you're gonna be able to spin up a little bit faster and maintain that speed. This bike definitely spins up well, but the maintaining speed, you do feel just a slight drag when comparing it to an all-out aero bike. Now, a lot of it has to come down to rider position, but if I'm keeping my same position on this bike versus an aero bike, the aero bike obviously is gonna outperform this thing on the flats. But again, Orbea doesn't really claim any aero benefits to this bike whatsoever. They purely wanted a climbing bike, so check that one off the list. But without the aero qualities, this bike certainly does not feel like a slug. On some of the group rides I was on, I had no problem keeping up, especially when I stayed in the draft of others. But if you want to go on a lead out train or even try to go for a sprint, then you might be just a little bit disappointed in this bike. So if you're hoping for a lightweight racing bike that also had some aero qualities to it, then honestly, this is probably not the bike for you. So now let's get into how this bike feels on the descents. Over the last few months, I've taken this bike on different types of descents, from very steep but straight, some long, windy, flowy descents, and some very technical, sharp downhill descents as well. I will say over all that different type of descending, this bike is more than capable to handle any of them. I think one of the defining characteristics that makes this bike such a good downhill bike is that short wheelbase. It's short to be very lively and direct, but it's not overly short to be twitchy and snappy. The bike gives you a very grounded feel and gives you a lot of confidence when going through tight corners. That short wheelbase allows you to get through some of those tight corners quickly, but not have any understeer like some other bikes. Especially paired with that 110 stem, it's a really great combination for going downhill. Anything shorter than a 100mm stem on this bike is probably gonna give you just a little bit too much of a snappy response. So I said this about the aero version of this bike, and I think it's worth repeating for this bike as well. These bikes go through the corners so well that some of these descents to me almost felt brand new. The corners were coming at me so quick that I had to grab a little bit of brake. It does take a little bit of time to recalibrate yourself to a new bike, no matter what. So after the first few weeks of riding this bike downhill, I really got the hang of it, and then it became really, really fun. But I will say, all my experience on this bike, it never felt squirrely at all. It felt extremely grounded and planted at all times, and it really gave me a lot of confidence. All right, so I've told you everything this bike does well, but let's get into some of the unique characteristics of this bike and what are some of the things that I would want to change. There's really nothing wrong with these wheels, but they do make a lighter wheel, so why not go for it? The lighter wheel is gonna spin up a little bit quicker and maybe even a little bit stiffer, but honestly, these wheels are just fine. The cockpit of this bike is really nice. It's really, really comfortable, but I would probably change it out for a one piece just to make it just a little bit lighter and just to make it look a little bit better. But again, there's really nothing wrong with the bars and stem with this bike. They're really, really comfortable, and I really like that extra 15mm of rise. Now, one of the things that I would want to see kind of a bigger change on this bike, and sorry Orbea, but I would like to see this bike be just a little bit more aero. I know, this is not your aero bike, it's an all-out ultra lightweight climbing bike, but I wish it just had a little bit more aerodynamic benefits to it to compete with some of the other bikes out on the market, especially when you're looking at bikes like the SL8, the Trek Madone, the Giant Propel, and the BMC Team Machine R. When you're going against bikes like that, you want something that's gonna climb just as good as this, but be just a little bit more efficient on the flats. The way that bikes are going, you can pretty much get them pretty much as light as these bikes, but you have the added efficiency and energy savings of the aero bike on the flats and the rolling terrain. And uphill, those aero bikes are pretty stiff too, so they definitely climb really well. Obviously, Tade just won the Tour de France on an aero bike that is just a little bit heavier than that V5 RS. All right, so now let's talk about what type of rider I think this bike could be good for. This bike can handle the climbs extremely well. It's very stiff and efficient up the climbs, but if you're going out for long days in the saddle, it is extremely comfortable. It's not a bike that is gonna bump and jar you around, and that keeps your body less fatigued and feeling fresher out on the bike. Again, I did a 10,000 foot day on this bike, and I don't remember feeling that quite refreshed at the end of a ride like I do on this bike. Unless you're someone that really wants an aero bike, maybe you're doing time trials, you're an Ironman and you only want one bike, or maybe you're a crit racer that really values aerodynamics and sprints, then this is probably not going to be the bike for you. I'll say it again, this bike is stiff and snappy where you want it to be, but comfortable where you need it to be. Whether you're an elite cyclist, a cycling enthusiast, a weekend warrior, or someone that is just looking for a nice, casual, long day out on the road, then this bike is going to be perfect for you. The geometry of this bike, again, is set up for anyone, whether they want to have a really low racing position or they want to have an upright, more endurance type of position. The geometry, again, is right there in between to really suit your needs. For me, I like to race, but my back isn't quite flexible. So again, having that 15mm riser handlebar in the front keeps it aesthetically looking slam, but adds a little bit of height to the stack, which keeps my back feeling happy. So is this going to be the bike for me? Well, honestly, I'm 90% there. I just have a few more things that I'm playing with in my head, but honestly, this bike is pretty amazing. The bike climbs well, it's very comfortable, but I wish it just had a little bit more aerodynamics. But if you guys want to know what the ultimate bike I land on is, then you're going to have to like and subscribe, come back and watch another video. All right, well, that'll about wrap it up for me. If you guys have any comments or questions about me or this bike, please leave them in the comments below. I answer every single question. If you guys want, you can also find me on Instagram and Strava, all at the Orange Helmet Guy. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Come back and watch some more. It really helps me out. If you guys have any future topics that you want me to talk about, please let me know as well. All right, well, it's getting pretty warm out here. I'm off to the lake to go meet the wife and puppy for some coffee. Thank you guys again so much for watching. Until next time, the Orange Helmet Guy, out.